Hello and welcome to On the Marie Curie Couch, the podcast that aims to break down taboos and start open, honest conversations about death and dying. I'm Jason Davidson. I'm a social worker by profession, and I've worked in palliative care, hospice care and bereavement support services for more than a decade. Each episode, we'll be speaking to a well-known guest to find out how they feel about their own mortality and how their personal experience of bereavement has shaped the way they live their life. Today, I'm on the Marie Curie couch with Victoria Emes. Victoria is a comedian, content creator and co-founder of Fitbitch, a fitness platform for women in midlife. She gained fame during her maternity leave by sharing candid and funny content about motherhood on social media. Since then, she's begun hosting a podcast, released a book, and launched Fitbitch to help women embrace strength training to feel fit and strong. Victoria Emes, welcome to the Marie Curie couch.
Thank you for having me. I'm very, very happy to be here.
You're welcome. I'm going to dive straight in. As you know, one of the aims of our podcast is to encourage conversations around death and dying and bereavement and grief. And I'd like to start by asking if you can tell me about a significant bereavement you've experienced in your life.
So it'll be coming up to 2 years now that I lost my dad. So yeah, he had leukemia and he had it for a long time before it developed into anything kind of chronic. But then when he did get the sort of final diagnosis, that was all quite a swift process. And to be honest, that has been my real first and only true experience of bereavement in my life. And I'm nearly 42. So I didn't really have particularly significant grandparents, and most of my grandparents were dead when I was born. So it's the first kind of relationship, very close relationship that I've had, and my first experience of losing someone.
I think we'll go on to talk about bereavement and grief, but if it's all right with you, if we could just go back to before your dad died and maybe when he'd been told that actually, you know, things had changed and he was terminally ill. Were there any conversations then between you both or as a family about death and dying and about his death?
There were, because, so what happened was that he became quite ill quite quickly and he was getting regularly checked up anyway. But the doctors sort of called him in and said, you know, what normally happens with the type of leukemia that had is that it would develop into one or the other types, and then that will be terminal, but it'll be like a 5-year period. But he got both of those things, which was, it's really rare for them both to happen at the same time. So it went from like us thinking, oh, okay, well, he'll still have like 5 years to live, to suddenly them saying, if you don't have any treatment whatsoever, then you'll basically be dead in 2 to 3 months. Which was so shocking at the time, you know, for all of us. So I think the conversation about it was always very open because it was such a stark diagnosis that there was no way of avoiding it, right? And we knew it was going to come. We just didn't know when or how that would look. Now, he did have treatment and he actually ended up, you know, living for like another 13 months, which was, again, against all the odds and everything else. And that whole period of time, then I don't think that we had a particularly direct conversation about him actually dying and death until he was in the very last stages of life, when he was in the hospital. And I mean, we did as a family, but without him, because I think he found it too difficult to talk about it, as it was kind of like too much. I suppose it was too confronting. It was too much of an admission of what was actually going to happen. And I suppose that's the really surreal thing about death, isn't it? Is that it just feels like such an abstract concept. And when you're the person that's dying, I can imagine that is just something that's incredibly difficult to sort of confront and to grapple with. So yeah, we didn't talk about things like a funeral or anything like that. That was never talked about until literally the week that he died.
I think that's such a true point, isn't it? Kind of just the abstract, the sort of concept of it and of death and dying. And so when you are living with a terminal illness and you are dying, it's like, well, how am I supposed to be feeling? And what am I supposed to be doing or saying? And actually, when you've just been getting on with life for however long that is, then you just continue doing that. And it's like, should I be doing anything in particular or having some types of conversations? What we talk about in our work is we would ask some of those quite practical things as a way into some of those conversations, like, funeral planning, asking somebody if they've got a will, if there's anything they're worried about from a financial point of view, from a housing point of view, have they got children? So as a social worker, for me, there's some of the conversations I might have with somebody. And that would then usually lead to, how is all of this for you and how are you coping, managing, feeling? Is there anything, you wanted to say to anybody? Giving people some ideas, like maybe being able to consider writing letters, or if there's anything somebody wants to do before they die. Because as you say, on a day-to-day, we're not giving them sort of top tips, are we, on what to think about and what to do when
exactly.
when
and he did very much go into that, like what you're saying. My dad was a really practical person, so he went into real, like, we used to always laugh about how anally retentive he was, but that really came out in that I think he was trying to claw back some sense of control. So he did do all the admin, the death admin, that he went hard in on, and like getting the will ready and making sure my mum was set up sort of financially and with the house and all of that sort of stuff that was, I suppose, about my mum more than him and what he was leaving behind for her. But yeah, then the actual idea of the funeral, I just don't think that he could ever talk about it because it was too raw.
Yeah, and talking about that means that you're going to die and there's going to be all the people who you love and care for, are going to be in a room and they're all going to be sad. And it's really, that must be tough stuff to think about. And so some of that conversation you were saying took place literally in the last week before your dad died. And then how was his funeral? Was it something that was kind of everybody was able to plan and create around him and the man he was?
Yeah, definitely. I think also having never had any experience of organising a funeral, that's probably, the immediate bit after death, once you're sort of like sunk in that, oh, okay, they're dead now. Oh, wait a minute. What? We've got to do all this stuff. So what do we do? How do we do that? Like Googling, what do you do when someone dies? Like literally that kind of basic, because none of us had any point of reference. And organising the funeral very much came to me and one of my sisters. So there's 4 of us, siblings. And even that, so my dad was an artist and a filmmaker. So he was a really creative man. And that obviously felt like it needed to be at the core of the funerals, just celebrating his creativity the best that we could. But then I think that lining that up with a funeral directors that wasn't just very sort of fusty. I think that's the only way I could describe it. Felt like really old fashioned and fusty with no creativity, So I ended up going on this massive hunt for the artistic funeral director. And we did find one. We found an incredible one. It's such a beautiful name for the funeral parlour. It's called Poetic Endings, which I love that. Anyway, that was an instant appeal of like, that's gorgeous. And because we went to lots of these funeral homes and, you just walk in and it was like, it just smelt of terrible, cheap air freshener. And the walls were peeling with the paint. You think, oh my God, this doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel like it's it's enough of a sort of like celebration for him to come somewhere like this. But then I found this place, and it made me laugh, because my mum, she can be quite like a snob. And I said, look, Mum, it's painted in furrow and ball colours. Dad would have loved this. You know, it's like, yeah, it's furrow and ball. Everything's going to be okay. And we went there, and it was just beautifully presented. You know, there was like beautiful sofas, and the people that ran it were just so lovely and just so nurturing, and had such empathy without it feeling a bit like an act almost. You know, it felt like they really genuinely do care about this. And because they were a slightly alternative funeral home, there was just like a few things that we could do. Like, he had a bright blue coffin, was one of the things that we chose for him, because that suited his personality. It was one of his favourite colours, and yeah, like that was beautiful. And they connected us with a celebrant who was absolutely brilliant as well. And just the whole thing was just done. Yeah, it was really lovely. And one of the things we did was, my dad always had Post-it notes for his work, because the way he thought, he would just scribble something down on a Post-it note, and there would just be Post-it notes everywhere in his office. So like, everyone got a Post-it note, and they could write a little note to him and then put it on the coffin. And, you know, we sang Sunny Afternoon by the Kinks. That was the song that everybody sang instead of having any hymns or anything. He wasn't a religious person. So it very much felt like it was truly him, about him. And it was lovely. It was beautiful. And like, lots of people came, and the few things that he did stipulate about the funeral were the music choices. So he knew exactly what they were. He didn't want anyone to wear black. So everyone came in their brightest, colourful clothes. And that was kind of it. Those were probably the only two things that he had said. Oh, I want these songs, and I don't want anyone wearing black, because he didn't want people to be moping around and miserable, you know, in his words. And then we just had a really nice wake afterwards. So it was a lovely experience. But it's a very strange time, that period of waiting for the funeral, I think, from when someone's died, because you know, I'm not a religious person, but I can completely and utterly see the point in having a funeral to mark the death and mark the end of someone's life, because that time really did feel like a strange limbo, where we were just kind of like, well, what happens now? You know, it's like, he's still sort of here, but when we need to say goodbye. But, you know, it was just odd. It was an odd time. Yeah.
I've heard people describe that time and those weeks following somebody's death, just as feeling in like a zombie state, like where the world's sort of happening around you, but you're not kind of part of it, as you're saying, that limbo. And I think it's kind of not, you know, yes, you're waiting for the funeral and someone's died, and it's like, oh, well, is the funeral going to bring something else, like from an ending point of view, you know, for things to start and shift and change. And actually, that's not always the case. That feeling can go on for quite a long time, you know, certainly sort of weeks afterwards. You know, no one's ever talked before on the podcast about funeral homes, and I think it's such an important point. And what we say to people is to kind of shop around, because
absolutely.
you know, you will have a different experience depending on where you go. And of course, I think classically, I mean, having worked in hospices and worked with lots of amazing funeral directors and amazing funeral homes, the people themselves, I've never met one person who wasn't just completely dedicated to their work, but I've been in loads of those dusty old offices and those kind of, you know,
what is that about?
Yeah, and I think what I was thinking about,
it makes the experience worse. It feels like we're going into a temple of death. That's what it feels like. And to me, it's more about the celebration of life than it is about that. And it's like, make the environment feel like it's not dead, because it's so depressing. Not that death in itself is depressing, but I think in that time of your life, when you're in that frame of mind, you want to go into somewhere that is nurturing, you know, visibly as much as it is emotionally, because that's what you need. You just need someone to scoop you up and kind of, you know, cuddle you and be like, it's going to be okay, you know. And that's what that poetic endings did for us. Like, it was a beautiful place run by beautiful people. In fact, I do think that the two women that founded it have written a book about grief because they gave it to my mum. The name escapes me, but if you go off and type, like Google poetic endings, I'm sure it'll come up with their names and you can find it. So they were, they're like living, breathing death, basically, to the point they've written a book about it.
And it was interesting because when you were describing when you walked in and the Farrow and Ball paint and the big sofas, and what I was thinking was, compared to something that's a bit more standard and stale, if you like, was that there was life in that room.
Yeah. It literally felt like somebody's living room, which that just immediately it disarms you, doesn't it? And it just gives you that like personal sort of touch. And just my mum, because we've been to so many and we come out of those other places, my mum had just cried her eyes out and just been like, this just doesn't feel dignified. And even the way she was so worried about what would happen to his actual physical body, because he had died in the hospital, so he was still there and had to be transported. And one of the places was like, oh yeah, we have a morgue and it's off whatever road it was. And it was like the idea for her of my dad being taken somewhere like on an industrial estate, she's just found that so upsetting. So I don't think we really think about these things, do we, until we're in it. She's like, oh yeah, from a practical point of view, where are they in that time from when they've died to the funeral? But whereas the funeral director there, she was personally going to collect him and she was personally going to wash him and get him ready for the funeral. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, so that kind of stuff, that just gave my mum complete reassurance. But yeah, she brought out a cup of tea and I could see my mum's face. I know her, and she just looked at me and she kind of like eyed up the cup and was like, oh, look at this cup. This is nice, isn't it? I thought we're in. This is the one.
Yeah. And, it kind of ticked the boxes and was what, you all wanted and needed as a family. And I think equally, of course, there will be people who want the kind of traditional, formal environment as well, but I think it's such a good point. And I suppose my message for anybody listening is definitely kind of shop around, because there are lots out there. There's lots of different price points as well, of course, in different funeral directors. But I think also, as you're describing, hopefully you'll find the one that fits not only the person who's died, but also you as an individual or a family.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but definitely shop around. I think we went to maybe 4 in total, and that was because I didn't find it straight away either. I really did go on a deep dive on Google to try and find it. It was like, what search terms am I using for this? Like artistic funeral, and I think something along the lines of that, it brought it up.
Yeah, good. And there's been, I've worked in sort of palliative care and end of life care for well over a decade, and it's changing all the time with regards to options for funerals and funeral directors. And I think there are some shifts happening, and as you're saying, you found somewhere that was a bit more modern as well. And that's good. I wanted to ask Victoria if you could talk a bit, and I know that it's only been just 2 years, but if you could talk a bit about your experience of bereavement and grief over the last 2 years, please.
I think it's just been so completely different to what I was expecting. And it's been such a roller coaster as well, of so many different feelings, that it definitely doesn't get easier. That's what I mean. Oh God, that sounds like so terrible if someone's writing it. It's not that it doesn't get easier. I think it just becomes more normal to you that is your life now without that person. And so that therefore just does sit less heavy, I suppose. But yeah, I think what I find the most is that it surprises me all the time, the grief. I kind of think, oh, I haven't really sort of felt, I haven't felt sad for a while. And then just one really seemingly unconnected, insignificant thing will happen. And suddenly it will just be like a massive wave of grief that you just have to surrender to and just sort of allow yourself to be washed over by it, because there's no escape from it really. And fighting it just doesn't work. It doesn't make it any better. So yeah, I think learning to lean into that surrender when it does come, not berating yourself for suddenly crying over something that seems like, oh, that's so stupid. Why am I crying over that? It's obviously not stupid. It's obviously means something and sets off, it's a trigger to set off a memory that's connected to them. But I still, and I don't think I ever will get my head around the fact that he's just like not going to come back. So that part I really struggle with, to just be like, oh, right, yeah, that's it. I'm never going to see him again. That's the bit that I find the hardest.
The kind of finality of it.
Yeah, exactly that word, the finality of it. And in a way, as the time passes, yes, it doesn't sort of weigh upon me with quite such bleak heaviness. But the other side is, it's like, oh God, it's now been nearly 2 years since I last saw him. So it's kind of that, you know, like the longer the time goes, the further away from him I am, if that makes sense.
And there's a sadness in that as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there is a sadness in that. This is very emotional. Oh my God. I don't know how I'm not absolutely bawling my eyes out, by the way. I don't know how I'm not crying. I keep getting there, and then it just is kind of, yeah, because it is still really raw.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, thinking for others listening as well, is that, you know, your description of the fact that it doesn't get any better, and what you're saying, you know, what you went on to say was the fact that your dad's died and that it's final and that it's a really kind of heavy weight doesn't change. And I think that does stay the same. And, you know, people we speak to, I know in my own personal experience of grief, and I know, you know, research as well shows us that the grief itself probably stays the same. However, we in time grow around it. So if the grief was a size or a ball, it stays the same. It's us that get bigger around it.
Yeah, I've seen a really lovely like infographic on social media that's exactly that, and it's using the ball, isn't it, as the reference? Yeah, that's exactly what it feels like, for sure.
Yeah, it makes sense. And there's also that thing about time as well, because I think often people will talk about time and put pressure on themselves, like you were saying, you know, don't berate yourself. I think that's really important. It's a really key message. This kind of, there ain't no time limit to it, and you got to go at your own pace. And also, I think there's the thing about remembering, if you do all of a sudden, you know, start crying in the middle of the supermarket when you're doing your shopping, because it can just come and it's unexpected and you don't know. Or, as you say, it could be over something that you might think is trivial and not worth tears, for example. But actually, if it happens and you're like, what's going on? Because some people will say, I just don't understand what's wrong with me. Like, what's wrong with me? Why am I getting upset over? Then remember grief, because that's probably what it is, you know. And I think it's about bringing yourself back to grief as well, isn't it? And allowing yourself to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, I've got 2 small children, and to grieve whilst mothering 2 small children has been, I mean, it's kind of been 50-50, in that it's been a blessing, and then it's also made it incredibly difficult, because they need me all the time. And I have to really consciously carve out time, especially in the beginning, to let myself actually grieve and to actually cry, and to just have that space to just feel what I'm feeling without it being interrupted by, Mummy, can you come and wipe my bum? You know, it's kind of like, it's that. And on one hand, like I said, like, they actually have grounded me and kept me sort of, you know, sane, I suppose, because I have had to continue fulfilling their needs whilst I've been going through this whole sort of process. But there are other times when you really do just want to sort of crawl up into a ball and cry, and you can't, because you've got to make their packed lunch or take them to school or whatever it is, you know. So I think I would rather have the children in the grieving process for me, because they just make you present, right, in the moment. I don't think you really live outside of the moment when you have children, which even from a mental health sort of point of view is actually a really healthy thing to do, just to be in the moment and be present, and not completely disappear off into yourself or into the grief, because I can see that it could have the potential to really suck me in deep, you know. But because of the kids, they've kind of kept one foot out of that, and then occasionally I will go into the deep dark place, but then I have to always come back because I have them.
And so there's something there, isn't there, about sort of being kind to yourself and that more gentle approach where I know it's all happening and it's all underneath. And if I had the time and I didn't have distractions, or I didn't have children, I didn't have other responsibilities, I wasn't doing other things, I could get, as you're saying, sucked in. And actually, so the other way of giving yourself some time sometimes is just like almost smaller steps, isn't it, in a way, to be able to kind of dip into it for a bit, and it's like, oh, that's enough for now, and I'll come back to it again in a kind of few more days. And I think that's a good way, if you can, to manage it, because it can be really overwhelming.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely see that experience of it becoming very overwhelming for my mum, for example, because obviously it's a completely different context for her. She's lost her life partner and now she's by herself, and she doesn't have children around all the time or a job even, or, you know, there's nothing else going on because she's in that stage of her life when she's retired, and you know what I mean? So I think it's easier for her to get sucked into it. And then obviously it was her partner, so it is completely different. But yeah, it's like, I think it can just be so consuming, and you have to consciously bring yourself out of it sometimes, because otherwise it will just consume you.
Are you able to support each other, you and your mum?
Yeah. So she doesn't live that far away from me, and you know, I try to see her pretty frequently. We see each other every week, or if not every other week. And she's got a dog now, so that's definitely helped things. You know, it was like, oh yeah, well, you definitely don't want to have any more kids, and I don't think that's going to happen, so let's get a dog instead, because that's essentially like having a child. But she's got this little dog, and yeah, he's just kind of become like, oh, he's brilliant. You know, he's brought joy and life back into her house, even, so she's not feeling that she's physically on her own. And he's hilarious, and yeah, he's made her laugh again a lot, which has been nice to see, even though she's like, that bloody dog, you know. But she loves him, and she really needs him, like, in her life. So it's been good. It gets her out as well, you know, everything, like all the things that she needs. She feels that she has purpose again, and I think that is really important as well in grief, like just to have some sense of purpose. And I suppose I have it, being a mum and my job and everything else, because it can feel like, what is the point sometimes, you know. I suppose that is death, isn't it? It's kind of like just holding up this stark mirror to what life is all about. It's kind of like, God, it just ends. Like, how can that make sense, you know?
Marie Curie's mission is to close the gap in end-of-life care. We're here for anyone with an illness they're likely to die from, and those close to them. Whatever the illness, wherever you are, we're with you to the end. Find out more at mariecurie.org.uk.
You've got to then create a life where the person's physically not existing in it anymore, and that's a whole new life.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's a new life as well. I think the other thing too, losing a parent, like, it does make you feel a little bit like you regress slightly, because you suddenly, that parent, especially if my dad was like, he was my emotional support big time, and to not have that is, I felt really unanchored without him. And so I've had to learn how to anchor myself without that reliance on him anymore. And that's been a journey in itself, you know. I mean, for me, and this is about carving out space for myself and facing up to the grief and all this stuff, therapy, that has been the place that I've been able to find a way, I think. And I've been in therapy for a year and a half. I went into it specifically after my dad died, and I don't know what I would have done without it. It has provided the anchor in many ways. And I mean, not just because of my therapist, but because just the tools that it's given me to be able to, like I said, anchor myself as well. But that it's been a whole learning experience, you know. It's kind of like, suddenly, how do you do that when the one thing that has been there as a consistent your whole life is just gone? It's been hard, but I think I'm anchoring myself okay. Just about.
Yeah, and it's ongoing, isn't it, you know, as well, Victoria, that you're describing. And just for anybody listening, maybe we're talking, you know, about how things have been to date over the last 2 years, but we're certainly not. I'm certainly not in any way for a second saying, you know, how was it like it was in the past, because it isn't. And as you said at the beginning, and I totally agree with you, that it's something that's there forever. We just learn to manage it and live with it.
Yeah, exactly.
Just before I move on to the next bit, and I'm going to change tack quite a bit, can I just ask your dad's name, please?
Yeah, it was Ian.
Ian. Okay, thank you.
I mean, go and Google him, because he was an animator, as I said. So he did all the animation for Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon, and then went on to become a director, filmmaker. So if you search him, you'll see plenty about him. So I know there's a question coming up about legacy, and that's an interesting one for me, because there's like that kind of legacy of him as an artist, and then there's also the legacy of him as my dad. So we'll come to that.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So another one of the aims of this podcast, and one of the reasons why we at Marie Curie, we want to kind of encourage people to have conversations around death and dying, is because what we know is, if people plan for the future and plan for death and dying, then the outcomes can be different for those left behind. And we've touched on it already. One example of planning is to maybe write a will. And so then when you die, and those people who are grieving for you and have got enough on their plate, although even with a will, it's still a lot of work, but you know, it can somehow lighten the load a bit. And so we do kind of promote that planning. And also, we know that when somebody close to us dies, it can make us think about our own mortality. And I wanted to ask if you ever thought about your own death.
I never had until this experience, but definitely seeing the end, being so up close and personal with death, it was definitely, I guess, it was quite harrowing. I mean, he was very sick. I think that's the other thing too, you know, like when someone's really sick when they die, just to see someone sort of deteriorate like that was really difficult. And I think for me, he ended up in a hospital in central London, and he sort of had like only one wish, was that he could just see some trees. But we were in central London, and we were on like the 23rd floor, something like that. And I can just remember that's all he wanted. He didn't have any other requests really, but he couldn't get that because of where he was in the world. And in that moment for me, I just felt like I want to get out of London, because that's where I do live here too. But there was something about that made me reflect or project into the future and think, when I'm in that position, I want to be somewhere that I am close to nature, because I think that has been a really important place for me, to be near nature, be surrounded by nature. In my grieving process, I've really found like being in the forest it's so healing. And my dad had that connection to nature too. And it's really pushed me to make a change in my life, that potentially, so we're going to move next year, basically. We're moving out of London. But yeah, just, I don't think I would have maybe have quite had the push to do it if it hadn't have been for that experience of kind of like seeing him not getting his final wishes because of where he was, which maybe that's a bit too of an abstract link to that question. I don't know. But I haven't really thought of myself. Yeah, like I suppose I'm like, well, who's going to be there? That's what I thought. I'm like, oh, right. So who's actually going to show up for my death then? That's I want to know. You know? But I suppose the thing with the way because he was so ill, and it was all like, we were anticipating all this. We knew it was all coming. the actual last part of his life, I would say, felt incredibly complete, in the sense that he knew he was going to die. He was kind of coming in and out of being sort of conscious and able to converse and all the rest of it. But he did get to deliver us a sort of final speech, if you like, directed individually to the whole family. He had something to say to every single one of us. So I feel really privileged. Sorry. You must have so many people cry on this podcast. Oh my God. It just felt like such a complete experience of losing somebody, because he said everything that he needed to say, he got to say to us in that moment. So I think, yeah, I would like to be able to have that opportunity before I die, to be able to tell the people that I love why I love them.
And it's so beautiful that he was able to do that. But I think also hearing you talk about that now, how important that's been for you and is for you now forever. And so I think it's you've said loads of wonderful things in the answer to that question, but I think that message as well to anybody listening is certainly, if anybody's living with a terminal illness or caring for somebody with a terminal illness, and if you are able to, and if you're able to say some of those things or have some of those conversations, if possible, then it can be an incredible gift, for want of a better word, for anybody left behind.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we did actually record it, so we have the recording of it as well, which, I mean, he sounds very poorly in it, so that's quite hard to hear that part of it, because it kind of brings back how sick he was. But to be able to relive the words has been quite important for me, just to revisit it and be able to listen to it. Something that I did do with my dad as well before he died was that I wrote down a list of questions that I wanted to ask him that I never really knew the answer to, or I just hadn't asked him those questions. And they were really just a most random bunch of questions. And funnily enough, they weren't about his work, because, so much of my dad's identity was being an artist. And I think he thought, oh, you're going to ask me questions about, well, what did it feel like to do this? So I didn't ask him anything about his work. I didn't. I asked him questions like, who was your first crush? And what's your favourite dinner? Like stuff like that. That stuff that I was like, I actually don't know that about him. And tell me the story of when you met my mum. And when did you first feel fear? Like, just really random questions like that. And I recorded that interaction, just audio. I didn't record it on camera, because thing is with my family is like, we're all like filmmakers, artists. It's like, let's make a documentary. It's like, no, I'm not going to go, not that extreme. I'll just put the record, because I didn't want the camera to then become like, it creates a slight sense of being performative, right? Because there's a camera on. So I just wanted it to be raw, my dad. So I just recorded the audio, and the answers were like amazing, and they satisfied all that curiosity that I've ever had. And now I have that as a record, and it gave me such an insight into him that I just didn't even know. Like, his first crush, he said there was a little girl that lived across the road from him, and he was absolutely obsessed with her. And like, I didn't know any of that. It's just like that sort of stuff. And about him playing in the trees, and but he just used to go off, because this used to be the 50s when children were just like, right, kick you out, see you later. And he used to go and build booby traps in the forest, and almost killed his little sister because he made one with a sheet of metal, and the sheet of metal like landed on her. Like, just mad stuff like that. I was like, oh my God. But I love that, because my dad is a boy. That's not my experience of him as a person, but to kind of get that insight and be like, God, this explains so much about you, in the way that he was. And it was lovely. And it was also a really lovely opportunity for us to connect in a way that wasn't talking about death, because he found it very difficult to talk about the actual death element. And that felt like it was a good way to feel close to him, without having to bring it up, and instead just to reflect back on his life in a positive way.
Yeah, I love that. And when you were talking, I was thinking, that's a way of getting to know and to learn a bit more about Ian the boy and Ian the man rather than dad. Isn't it? You know, kind of it's outside of that role. And also you reminded me, my dad died in 2017, and when he was ill for about 8 months until he died. And in that period, he took me to this place, and it was where there used to be an old hospital, and it had been knocked down, and there's like parkland there as well, and there's a park, and he took me there and he was telling me, and that was where his dad had died.
Right.
Where he took me in the old hospital. So he took me to the park and then to this place, and was describing the whole of his dad's death, which I hadn't even asked him. It was completely unprompted. And the day his dad died, he was telling me all about it. And he died before I was born, well, when I was tiny. And then there was this huge conker tree, and we went over to the tree, and he was saying, this is the tree I used to climb for conkers when I was 6 and 7. So it had been there that long. So
I just love that.
It was his childhood conker tree. So, and it was the conkers were out, they were all over the floor. And so I collected loads and dried them out, and I've still got them in the kitchen. And
that's lovely.
So nice, I think, to be able to do those things. And actually, what that reminds me is that it's not necessarily about kind of formally sitting down and having conversations, which can be really tough to have, like you said in the very beginning, you know, to have those conversations. Then there's an element of having to face the reality of what's happening for you if you're the one who's terminally ill and dying, and that might just be too difficult. But actually, just having more general conversations about, like, asking questions about their childhood and or other things is great.
Yeah, and it's such a nice way to remember them, right? You know, especially, you know, recording it. I think one of the things I really miss about him is his voice. So to be able to just be like, oh, you know, I just really want to hear his voice, just to be able to put that on, and it just be such a nice conversational thing, just almost like listening to a podcast, right? It's just kind of, but it's your dad. So I mean, I would definitely recommend recording it if I suppose it's how you're wired, but for me, like, I love that input that's like auditory or visual. I love that makes me really feel close to the person.
Thank you. Just a couple of more questions left, and the next question is about legacy. Is that something that's important to you?
Yeah, so like I just touched on before, we are actually literally managing his artistic legacy on one hand. So we've been, even this has just been a minefield, because he's an artist, and upstairs at my mum's house is where he worked, and there are hundreds and thousands of drawings of animation cells. There's just so much artwork, film cans, videos, you name it, it's all up there. And he didn't do anything to organise that before he left. So that has been a lot of work for us. And again, I ended up going on a big research deep dive of like, what do you do with an artist's sort of literal legacy of artwork? And we've been working with a organisation that do exactly that. So there's been like cataloguing going on. The Birmingham Museum or University, are going to take in a donation of his work. The BFI have taken in a load of his film. So there's all, and that just, if you can imagine the administration of that is just so intense. So my other sister, she's kind of taken the lead of that, but it's been a hell of a lot of work. So there's that, because you don't just want his work, it was of real significant cultural value, like what he did in terms of animation. He was quite revolutionary in his technique, and so you don't want that to just disappear into the ether, never to be spoken of again. So it's about preserving that, but then his legacy as our dad is something completely different. And I think that for me, that is coming out in my playfulness in parenting is directly from my dad. And I feel like that's how I'm continuing on the legacy of him being just such a clown, being so entertaining, so like imaginative with us as kids, and just doing exactly that with my children, just basically dicking around quite a lot. And they absolutely love it. And that's my dad. That is definitely, yeah. And then I think too, I've ended up in a creative career. I work, I make films. It's not on the scale that my dad did, but I'm a content creator. So I make a lot of film, videos, whatever. And so I feel that creative side of me is also the legacy of my dad, because he grew up nurturing all of our creativity and doing clay sessions with us, painting, taking us to art museums, all the rest of it. Like that as well is living on through me and what I do, in a completely different context to how he was artistic, but it's like at the core of who I am, is being creative.
And I think also what you talked about earlier about nature and the trees and, sort of gravitating towards that. And that was something, again, from your dad's legacy point of view, was something that he loved and enjoyed. And so that got me thinking that actually maybe it continues and there's more to come that you don't even know about yet.
Yeah.
With regards to your dad's legacy, it's gonna kind of keep giving, but actually who knows when. And yeah, that's a really, and I've certainly found some of that. And I know others I've spoke to have as well, that actually it can continue in the kind of months and years to come without you even knowing it just now.
And that's how they stay alive. If they're not here in the physical form, then they are in the emotional and spiritual. And I wasn't someone that was particularly spiritual before at all, but I think now I feel his presence so frequently. Like he's definitely still here. I'll tell you something that this really did completely give me the heebie-jeebies in the nicest possible way. So when my dad died and come back from the hospital, and it was probably the day after he'd died, and I was on the phone to my best friend, just telling her everything that had happened. And my Alexa came on full blast playing Kinks' Sunny Afternoon, which is my dad's song that we played at the funeral, with no prompt. It just started playing. And I was on the phone. And obviously, I was like, what the? What's going on? Oh my God, it's my dad. We were both freaking out because my friend was like, oh my God, that's got to be him, And I really did. For me, that was, I don't care what anyone else says, like that was my dad. He was telling me, I'm all right, I've made it, wherever I'm going, I'm here, and it just felt, yeah, it was bizarre, so bizarre. So I think at that point I was like, yeah, go surreal, go so absolutely real.
Oh, it's lovely. I love that.
Yeah, I know. Oh my God, it made me cry so much because obviously it was like, he's all right, And I've spoken really openly about death with my children as well. And we talk about Grandad a lot because my son really remembers him. My daughter, she's only, 5, so she doesn't remember him as much, but she does still say, oh, it's funny, Grandad. But we've got this thing downstairs that one of the lights flickers. She once said, oh, why is it flickering? I said, oh, it's just Grandad. He's saying hello. So now every time it flickers, she's like, oh, Grandad's here. He's just saying hello, And yeah, we got a thing with rainbows. I think you obviously do look for those signs because they bring you so much comfort, don't they? But whenever the light flickers or, I see a rainbow, then that's always like, oh, there's my dad. He's just saying hello, It's nice.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you said earlier, as you said right at the very beginning as well, it's keeping someone alive, isn't it? And it's always keeping them around. Yeah. And I think that thing for families with children and or grandchildren or new children that are coming along, then, yeah, you can talk about them. They might not remember them or might not have met them, but you can introduce them to them, can't you? And tell them stories about them. Because I think, I'm guessing, I'm not a parent, but I'm guessing, as a mother or father, then it's important that your children know you had a mother and father and who they were and what they were about.
Yeah, exactly. And kids have no filter. And sometimes they just really lighten the sort of mood. So there was a couple of times when my dad was really sick and my son just said, Grandad, aren't you dead yet? which obviously made us all really laugh. And then he had a complete obsession after he died of just going up to strangers and be like, oh, hello, what's your name? Is your dad dead? That was his favourite question to ask people, like total strangers. He was like, oh my God, Oliver, stop it. But yeah, it was him like processing it, making sense of it. So they do just bring such lightness in those sort of dark moments.
It's so lovely. Is there anything you wanted to talk about on the podcast today, or anything you wanted to say for anybody listening who might be grieving that I've not mentioned or asked about?
No, I just think this is just such it's just such a good opportunity to talk about death in a really positive way, isn't it? And we don't talk about it enough. And I think people feel so scared of saying the wrong thing, and so sort of shy away or retract from conversations about death, and particularly don't know how to deal with grieving people. So the more we can talk about it and normalize the experience, because when you do start talking about it, almost everybody has some experience of grief too. So it's a universal experience, but yet we all just seem to be so terrified of talking about it. So things like this, it's just brilliant in my opinion. So thank you for having me on. And it's been really lovely, even though I've been like, oh my God, I'm going to cry so much at so many points. It's been so lovely to talk about my dad as well.
Good, I'm glad to hear that. Well, Victoria Eames, thank you for joining me on the Marie Curie couch. Thank you for sharing some of your dad Ian's story. And it's been lovely to meet you.
Thank you.
So that's all for this episode of On the Marie Curie couch. We hope it's got you thinking about matters of life and death, and perhaps starting those conversations with your own friends and family. Marie Curie's here to help. From planning ahead to coping with bereavement, you can talk through any concerns you have around the end of life with our support line team, which also includes specially trained nurses. Call us on 0800 090 2309 or search Marie Curie online. This podcast is produced and edited by Marie Curie with support from Ultimate Content. The music featured is Time Lapse by Pan-Oceanic. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please do like and subscribe. Thanks for listening. Until next time, goodbye.